They were not described as demons at first. They were called watchers. That single word opens one of the most debated mysteries in ancient religious literature. In the Book of Enoch, these beings do not merely haunt the edges of heaven. They descend, they make an oath, they take wives, they teach metalwork, cosmetics, astrology, weapons, enchantments, and the reading of signs in the sky. Then the world changes. Ancient text Enoch says 200 watchers came down upon Mount Hermon. Their leader was named Semjaza. Another, more infamous figure was Asael, often rendered Azazel in later traditions. Historical evidence fragments of Enoch were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, proving this was not a medieval fantasy. Jewish readers were copying parts of this story before Christianity even existed. Mainstream scholarly view scholars still debate whether the Watchers were fallen angels, divine rebels, mythic teachers, or symbolic warnings against forbidden knowledge. Possible interpretation before this video ends. 3 discoveries will matter most: their names, their mountain, and the strange knowledge they gave humanity. The story begins in a world where mountains were not just mountains. To ancient people, high places were thresholds. The wind was thinner there. The air felt closer to heaven. Storm clouds gathered around the peaks like living walls. A person standing on a summit could see the valleys below, the sky above, and the dangerous space between them. That is why Mount Hermon matters. Ancient text, the Book of Enoch says, "And they were in all 200, who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon." Then it adds the detail that makes the scene unforgettable. They called the mountain Hermon because they swore an oath there. The passage is not casual geography. It turns a real landscape into the place of a cosmic agreement. The Watchers do not simply fall from heaven. They gather. They decide. They bind themselves together. But why Hermon? Historical evidence. Mount Hermon rises near the northern edge of ancient Israel and southern Syria. Snow covers its upper slopes in winter. Meltwater feeds streams connected to the Jordan system. In antiquity, the region stood near cultural crossroads where Israelite, Aramaean, Phoenician, and later Hellenistic traditions overlapped. A mountain like this was never neutral. Mainstream scholarly view. Many scholars see Hermon as part of the story's ancient Near Eastern atmosphere. It is a borderland mountain, a sacred height, a place where heaven and earth could be imagined touching. Possible interpretation by setting the descent there. Enoch may be saying the Watchers entered human history at a boundary, not only a geographic boundary, but a moral one. But the next passage changes everything. Ancient text Enoch says, "The Watchers saw the daughters of men, desired them, and said to one another, 'Come, let us choose wives for ourselves from among the children of men.'" The words are simple. That is what makes them disturbing. The Watchers are not portrayed as distant stars or abstract forces. They speak like a group making a forbidden decision. They know the act carries danger. Semjaza, their leader, fears that he alone will be blamed. So the others answer with an oath. They will all do it together. This oath creates the first mystery. Was the sin desire? Was it rebellion? Was it the crossing of a boundary between divine and human orders? Or was the real offense what came afterward? Because most readers stop at the marriages. Enoch does not. Ancient text. The women give birth to giants. These beings, often called Nephilim in related biblical traditions, become violent. They consume human food. Then they turn against animals. Then, in the grim logic of the story, they turn against humanity itself. The ground becomes soaked with blood. The earth cries out. Historical evidence. The Watcher's story is closely connected to Genesis 6, where sons of God take human women and produce mighty figures of old. Genesis gives only a few verses. Enoch expands the episode into a full cosmic disaster. Mainstream scholarly view. Many scholars understand Enoch as an interpretation of Genesis 6. It takes a brief, mysterious biblical passage and builds an entire explanation for the spread of violence before the flood. Possible interpretation. The story may be explaining evil as something larger than ordinary human weakness. In Enoch, corruption enters through a rupture in the structure of creation, but Enoch is not finished. What comes next is even stranger. The Watchers do not only father giants, they teach. Ancient text. Assel teaches men to make swords, knives, shields, breastplates, and ornaments. He shows women the use of cosmetics, dyes, bracelets, and precious stones. At first, the list feels oddly practical. Weapons, jewelry, metalwork, decoration. But in Enoch's world, knowledge is never just technical. It carries moral force. To teach humans how to shape metal is to change warfare. To teach ornamentation is to change desire, status, and display. To reveal hidden arts is to accelerate civilization before wisdom is ready to control it. The next detail is rarely discussed. Other Watchers teach other arts. One teaches enchantments. Another teaches astrology. Another teaches the signs of the sun. Another teaches the courses of the moon. Another teaches the interpretation of clouds and stars. The story suddenly expands from sex and violence into science, magic, and the structure of the sky. Ancient text. The Watchers reveal eternal secrets that were preserved in heaven. That phrase is the center of the mystery. What makes knowledge forbidden? Historical evidence in the ancient world? Specialized knowledge often belonged to priests, scribes, diviners, healers, astronomers, and metalworkers. These skills were powerful because they were rare. A person who could read the sky, forge a blade, mix pigments, or interpret omens possessed authority. Mainstream scholarly view scholars often read this section as a critique of certain forms of knowledge. The text does not condemn learning itself. Enoch contains complex astronomical material. The problem is knowledge removed from its proper divine order. Possible interpretation. The Watchers may represent a fear as old as civilization itself. Human beings can receive knowledge faster than they develop restraint. This is where the story becomes more than myth. It becomes an ancient diagnosis. The world is not ruined by ignorance alone. It is ruined by knowledge without moral limits. Then Enoch shifts the camera upward. The cries from earth reach heaven. Ancient text. The archangels look down and see bloodshed, lawlessness, and suffering. Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, and Uriel appear in different roles across the traditions. They ask why heaven has allowed this to happen. This is not a simple battle scene. It is a courtroom atmosphere. The earth is evidence. Human suffering is testimony. The Watchers are the accused. The giants are the consequence. And God gives judgment through angelic agents. Historical evidence. The names and roles of angels became increasingly important in Second Temple Jewish literature. Roughly the period between the Persian era and the rise of early Christianity. Texts from this era often explore heaven as an ordered realm, with ranks, messengers, books, judgments, and cosmic geography. Mainstream scholarly view Enoch belongs to this wider apocalyptic imagination. It reveals hidden causes behind visible history. It tells readers that violence on earth has heavenly dimensions. Possible interpretation. The Watcher's story may have helped ancient communities explain why the world felt morally broken, not because God lost control, but because rebellious beings violated boundaries and unleashed forces humans could not master. But the punishment is not aimed only at the earth. It reaches the Watchers themselves. Ancient text. Asel is bound hand and foot. He is cast into darkness. Sharp stones cover him. He waits there until the day of judgment. The image is severe. A being once associated with heavenly knowledge is buried beneath the earth. The teacher of metal and adornment is placed under jagged stone. The revealer of hidden arts is hidden from the world. The symbolism is hard to miss. What came down from heaven is driven below the ground. What was revealed too early is sealed away. Another manuscript tradition preserves variations in names and details, but the pattern remains: descent, oath, forbidden union, forbidden knowledge, violence, judgment, imprisonment. The evidence becomes more complicated when we remember this was not a marginal story. Historical evidence. Aramaic fragments of Enoch were discovered at Qumran among the Dead Sea Scrolls. These fragments show that parts of the Enochic tradition circulated in Jewish communities centuries before later Christian debates over Scripture. Mainstream scholarly view. This does not mean every Jewish group accepted Enoch as Scripture. It means the tradition was old, influential, and copied seriously. Possible interpretation. The Watchers were not an afterthought. For some ancient readers, they explained the hidden history behind human corruption, and that raises the question that drives the rest of the investigation. If Enoch calls them Watchers, why do later readers often call them fallen angels? And did the earliest audience understand those words the same way we do? The word Watcher sounds familiar now, but in the ancient world, it carried a different weight. Ancient text in the Aramaic Enoch fragments. The Watchers are called Iron, a term related to wakefulness, alertness, and heavenly vigilance. They are not introduced first as horned monsters. They are beings who watch. That changes the tone of the story. A watcher is supposed to observe, to guard, to remain awake while the world sleeps. The title suggests responsibility before it suggests rebellion. Mainstream scholarly view scholars often connect the language of watchers to older Jewish and Mesopotamian ideas of divine beings assigned to heavenly courts, cosmic order, and supervision of earthly affairs. Possible interpretation. The horror of Enoch may not be that monsters invaded the world. It may be that guardians abandoned their post. This is where historians disagree, because another ancient phrase complicates everything. Ancient text Genesis 6 does not use the word watchers. It speaks of the sons of God or sons of the gods, depending on translation. These beings see the daughters of men and take wives. The passage is brief, almost too brief. Genesis gives the spark. Enoch gives the fire. But are they describing the same beings? Historical evidence. Jewish interpreters in the Second Temple period often expanded difficult biblical passages through retelling. A strange verse could become a full narrative. A short mystery could become a cosmic history. Mainstream scholarly view. Many scholars see the Watcher's story as one of the most important early interpretations of Genesis 6. It explains who the sons of God were, what they did, and why their actions helped corrupt the world before the flood. Possible interpretation. Enoch may preserve an ancient attempt to answer a question Genesis leaves unresolved. Who crossed the boundary first? And what did that crossing unleash? But there is another translation problem. The English word angel can mislead modern readers. Today, many people imagine angels as gentle figures in white light. Wings, harps, comfort, protection. Ancient texts are more complicated. In Hebrew and Greek, the words often translated as angel can simply mean messenger. In later religious imagination, angels become a vast hierarchy of heavenly beings, but the older language is not always as fixed as modern readers assume. So, when people say the Watchers were fallen angels, they may be using a later category to describe an older and stranger tradition. Ancient text Enoch presents them as heavenly beings under authority. They descend from heaven. They disobey. They are judged by higher angelic powers. That certainly resembles later fallen angel traditions, but the text also gives them names, leaders, specialties, and a collective oath. They feel less like vague demons and more like a rebellious order. That distinction matters, if they were only symbols. Then the story is a moral parable about pride and corrupted knowledge, if they were understood as literal heavenly beings. Then Enoch is describing a cosmic crime scene, if they were inherited from older mythic traditions. Then the Watchers may be part of a wider ancient Near Eastern pattern, where divine beings interact dangerously with humans. The next detail is rarely discussed. The Watchers are not punished simply for descending. They are punished for revealing what was hidden. Ancient text Enoch says, humans learned all iniquity through Asael. The blame for corruption is placed heavily on the teacher of weapons, ornament, and forbidden arts. Mainstream scholarly view. Some scholars argue that Asael, or Azazel, became a concentrated symbol of illicit knowledge and ritual impurity. In Leviticus, Azazel appears in connection with the scapegoat ritual, though the exact meaning of the name remains debated. Possible interpretation. Later readers may have connected different traditions under one dark figure: a wilderness power, a bearer of impurity, a revealer of dangerous arts, a rebel bound away from the community. That makes the Watcher's story much more than a tale of angelic lust. It is a story about knowledge crossing borders. Heaven to earth, sacred to ordinary, secret to public, controlled to uncontrolled. And once that knowledge arrives, it cannot be gathered back. This twist changes how the whole story reads. The Watchers may not have been remembered only because they sinned with women. They may have been remembered because they explained why civilization itself felt morally dangerous. Weapons protect a city, but they also multiply killing. Cosmetics beautify the body, but they can also intensify vanity, seduction, and status. Astronomy can measure the calendar, but it can also become divination. Metalwork can make tools, but it can also make war. The text is not anti-human progress in a simple sense. Enoch itself contains elaborate astronomical visions. It cares deeply about calendars, heavenly order, and cosmic measurement. So the issue is not knowledge. The issue is unauthorized revelation. And that raises the bigger question. Were the Watchers condemned because they taught humans things that were evil, or because they taught humans things before humanity was morally ready to bear them? The Watcher's story does not stand alone. It belongs to a world crowded with mountains, divine councils, star knowledge, dangerous teachers, and beings who cross the line between heaven and earth. That does not mean archaeology proves the Watchers existed. It means the story speaks the language of its age. Historical evidence across the ancient Near East. Mountains were often imagined as sacred meeting points. Temples were built like artificial mountains. High places became sites of sacrifice, oath, vision, and divine encounter. Stone steps rose upward. Smoke moved into the sky. Priests stood between earth and heaven. Mount Hermon fits that pattern. Cold wind moves across its ridges. Snow brightens the summit, while valleys below remain dark. Water descends from its slopes and feeds life beneath it. To an ancient imagination, such a mountain could feel like a natural gateway. Some researchers have noted that Hermon's location also mattered. It stood near zones of cultural contact, Israelite memory, Aramaean religion, Phoenician influence, and later Greek traditions all touched the wider region. Stories could travel there, names could shift, old divine geography could be rewritten through new theology. This is where historians disagree. Mainstream scholarly view. Most scholars would not treat the Hermon descent as a literal historical report. They read it as mythic geography, a real place used to frame a cosmic event. Possible interpretation. The author may have chosen Herman because it already carried associations of height, boundary, and sacred danger. The mountain becomes evidence inside the story, not evidence outside it. But the comparisons become even more intriguing when we look east. Historical evidence. Mesopotamian traditions included semi-divine figures associated with ancient knowledge. The Apkallu were remembered as sages from before the flood. They brought civilization, ritual skills, and learned arts. In some traditions, they were linked with kingship, writing, building, and sacred wisdom. The similarities are intriguing, although no consensus exists. Ancient text. Enoch's watchers also belong to the world before the flood. They reveal knowledge. Their actions help explain why the pre-flood world becomes corrupt. Mainstream scholarly view scholars have compared Enochic watchers with Mesopotamian flood traditions, not because they are identical, but because they share a cultural environment. Ancient scribes often reshaped older motifs into new theological arguments. Possible interpretation. Enoch may be reversing the prestige of ancient sages. What one culture remembered as civilizing wisdom, another could reinterpret as forbidden corruption. That reversal matters, because the watchers teach things that look like civilization itself: metals, ornament, divination, heavenly signs, the calendar, the reading of nature. Modern anthropology shows that early societies often treated specialized knowledge as sacred or dangerous. The person who could smelt metal controlled fire, stone, and transformation. The person who tracked the moon controlled ritual time. The person who interpreted stars could advise kings, farmers, priests, and armies. Knowledge was power before it became information, but that was only the beginning. Astronomy gives the story another layer. Ancient text parts of the Enochic tradition include detailed concern with heavenly movements, calendars, gates of the sun, lunar cycles, and cosmic order. The same collection that condemns forbidden star knowledge also preserves careful astronomical speculation. This creates a tension. If astronomy appears inside Enoch, why condemn the watchers for teaching heavenly signs? The answer may lie in order. Mainstream scholarly view. Many scholars understand Enochic astronomy as priestly, calendrical, and theological. It presents the heavens as obedient, measured, and governed by divine command. The watchers, by contrast, reveal knowledge outside proper authority. Possible interpretation. The text may distinguish between sacred observation and illicit manipulation. Watching the heavens in obedience is one thing, using celestial signs for domination, magic, or rebellion is another. That same pattern appears in the list of forbidden arts. Weapons are not just objects. They change the sound of a village. Hammer strikes carry through the night. Ore glows in the furnace. A blade cools in water with a hiss. Men who once fought at close range now carry sharpened metal that extends violence beyond the body. Ornament is not just beauty. It alters social life. Colored minerals become pigment. Polished stones become signals of status. The body becomes a surface for display. Desire, rivalry, and power. Divination is not just curiosity. It claims access to hidden time. It promises to read tomorrow before tomorrow arrives. The evidence becomes more complicated. Modern science does not confirm Enoch's supernatural explanation. Archaeology does not reveal 200 watchers on Herman. Geology does not identify Aesol under stones in the desert. But archaeology does confirm that ancient people lived inside worlds where metal, ritual, cosmetics, astronomy, and social power were deeply connected. Historical evidence excavations across the Near East have uncovered metal tools, weapons, pigments, cosmetic containers, amulets, astronomical texts, ritual objects, and temple architecture. These finds show that the technologies named in Enoch were not abstract. They belonged to lived human culture. Mainstream scholarly view. Enoch is not a technical manual. It is a moral interpretation of culture. It asks why the same abilities that build society also destroy it. Possible interpretation. The Watcher's story may preserve an ancient suspicion of acceleration. When knowledge spreads without wisdom, civilization can become more efficient at violence. That makes the myth feel strangely modern. Human beings still ask the same question. Can a discovery be brilliant and dangerous at the same time? Can a tool save lives and destroy cities? Can knowledge outrun conscience? The Book of Enoch answered in the language of its own world. It imagined that forbidden teachers came down from the heights, opened heaven's locked rooms, and left humanity with gifts it could not control. But if the story became so influential, another question remains. Why did many religious communities eventually leave it outside the Bible for centuries? Enoch did not disappear. It moved. That distinction matters. Many people imagine forbidden books being erased in a single dramatic act. A council gathers. A vote is taken. A text vanishes. But the history of Enoch is slower, stranger, and more revealing. Ancient text. The Book of Enoch survives most completely in Ge'ez, the classical language of Ethiopia. In the Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, Enoch remained part of the biblical canon, historical evidence outside Ethiopia. The book circulated in fragments, quotations, translations, and memories. Aramaic pieces survived at Qumran. Greek and Latin traces appeared elsewhere. Early Christian writers knew it. Some quoted it, some respected it, others became uneasy with it. The next detail is rarely discussed. Enoch was not controversial only because it mentioned angels. The Bible already had angels. The problem was the scale of Enoch's unseen world. It gave names. It mapped heavens. It described prisons for rebellious beings. It explained evil through cosmic rebellion. It preserved calendars, visions, judgments, and heavenly journeys. It offered answers to questions that Genesis left unresolved. For some readers, that made it valuable. For others, that made it dangerous. Mainstream scholarly view. Jewish and Christian communities did not develop one identical canon at the same time. Different groups preserved different collections of sacred writings. Authority formed gradually through use, debate, liturgy, language, theology, and community memory. Possible interpretation. Enoch fell out of many canons, not because everyone forgot it, but because many communities became cautious about its authority. This is where the history becomes complicated. In the New Testament book of Jude, a prophecy attributed to Enoch is quoted directly. Jude speaks of the Lord coming with holy ones to execute judgment. That quotation shows that at least some early Christian circles knew Enochic tradition and considered it meaningful. But meaningful did not always mean canonical. Historical evidence. Early Christian writers such as Tertullian valued Enoch, while others became more hesitant. Over time, church authorities in many regions preferred texts with stronger liturgical use, apostolic connection, and broader acceptance. Mainstream scholarly view. The formation of the biblical canon was not a simple act of suppression. It was a long process of recognition, exclusion, debate, and regional difference. Possible interpretation. Enoch may have seemed too expansive, too speculative, too difficult to control within later doctrinal boundaries. Another manuscript preserves a different kind of survival. In Ethiopia, the book remained alive, not as a rumor, not as a lost title, as scripture. Imagine the contrast. In much of the Mediterranean world, Enoch became a shadow behind other texts. In Ethiopia, Scribes copied it in sacred language. Churches preserved it. Readers encountered the Watchers not as a buried secret, but as part of a living religious inheritance. That alone changes the story. The Watchers were not simply rejected by history. They were remembered differently. Wow. Historical evidence in the modern period? European scholars gained renewed access to the Ethiopic Book of Enoch. Then the Dead Sea Scrolls transformed the conversation. The Qumran fragments proved that core Enochic traditions were far older than some critics had assumed. Mainstream scholarly view today. Enoch is studied as a major Second Temple Jewish text. It is essential for understanding apocalyptic literature, angelology, demonology, early Jewish interpretation of Genesis, and the background of some early Christian ideas. Possible interpretation. The controversy around Enoch comes from its position at the edge. It is close enough to biblical tradition to feel familiar, but strange enough to disturb the boundaries of later orthodoxy. And that is why the Watchers remain so powerful. They stand at the intersection of scripture, myth, memory, and forbidden knowledge. They are not easy to classify. They are not fully inside the familiar canon for most readers. They are not fully outside biblical imagination either. They occupy the border, the same kind of border where Enoch placed them in the beginning, on a mountain between heaven and earth. So, who were the Watchers? The answer depends on which layer of evidence we are reading. Ancient text. In the Book of Enoch, they are heavenly beings who descend to earth, swear an oath on Mount Hermon, take human wives, produce violent offspring, reveal forbidden knowledge, and receive judgment. That is what the text says. Historical evidence. The story is old. Aramaic fragments at Qumran show that Enochic traditions circulated among some Jewish communities before Christianity. The account also grows from the strange few verses in Genesis 6, where the sons of God take the daughters of men. That is what historians can trace. Mainstream scholarly view. Most scholars read the Watcher's story as apocalyptic interpretation. It is not ordinary history writing. It is a theological explanation of evil, violence, forbidden knowledge, cosmic disorder, and the crisis of the world before the flood. That is where academic caution begins. Possible interpretation. The Watchers may be fallen angels. They may be mythic rebels. They may be rewritten memories of ancient divine beings. They may represent the fear that civilization can be corrupted by knowledge without restraint. But none of those options fully closes the case, because the story works on more than one level. If the Watchers were meant literally, Enoch describes a hidden catastrophe behind human history, a rebellion from above, a rupture between heaven and earth, a forbidden transmission of knowledge that changed the world. If they were symbolic, the story is still unsettling. It says ancient people understood technology, violence, beauty, astronomy, and power as morally charged. They knew human progress could carry a wound inside it. And if the Watchers were inherited from older mythic traditions, then Enoch becomes something even more complex. A Jewish apocalyptic rewriting of older sacred memories, reshaped into a warning about boundaries. What remains uncertain is the original meaning behind every name, every title, and every fragment. What remains clear is the force of the question. Why did ancient writers imagine that the deepest corruption of humanity began not in ignorance, but in revelation? That may be why the Watchers endured. They are not merely figures from a lost book. They are a mirror held up to every age that believes it can handle any knowledge it discovers. And somewhere, on the cold summit of Mount Hermon, the old question still waits in the wind.